Uh, Today I have a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. He's a distinguished personality in the field of academia, Mr. Eric Martin, an author and a leadership expert. Eric Martin's quest to democratize leadership has taken him all around the world, from the White House to the foothills of Himalayas. Eric founded and leads ACA. It's Adaptive Change Advisors, which is the premier mission-based adaptive leadership organization. It's a worldwide organization. His mission is to put leadership tools that drive the change into the hands of anyone who seeks the meaningful outcome. Eric has been published in FAST Germany, Stanford Social Innovation Review. As an environmental leader, the book Your Leadership Movement. The book features the extraordinary leadership of the people within India's scavengers community. Eric has served as an advisor, speaker, and a leadership trainer in a variety of places, including United Nations, World Bank, Cornell University, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Google, Microsoft, Verizon, the White House, and the National Academy for Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Please join me welcoming Eric Martin on the stage.
Jai Bhim. This is quite an honor. This is the first time that I've had an opportunity to speak to these topics that I care so much about. The scavenger community, oppression, leadership, and to do that talk here. Usually I'm in India, in places in the slums of Delhi or in Haryana. So this is the first time I'm here, and what a beautiful place to see you all. And to have the children here as well. I was talking to Avi. Is Avi here, or did he leave? Little boy, 5 years old, yeah. Just that energy and the music and the invocation is, it really sets the tone, I think, for what I want to share with you today. So I want to suggest that each of you, each of us, is in the work of mobilizing people to tackle challenges that have no known or easy answers. And that is the work of leadership. Mobilizing people to tackle challenges that have no easy answers. This challenge that we all face, that you face, that your families face, that your ancestors have faced for a very long time. When I talk about leadership, I'm talking about something so simple it's easy to miss. There's a man that I met in Haryana who's from the scavenger community. And he runs a series of education centers for children after school, because although they may have access to public education, it's often not very good, or they're not treated very well by their teachers and students. And it's a very small center. The bookshelf is very sparse. Many of the books that I saw coming in are also on that bookshelf. And the teachers there are all drawn from the community. They're not credentialed. They've not graduated from any higher education. Some have not gone to school at all. And the teachers would often say to this man, his name is Vimal, why don't we buy some more books? We have a little bit of money. We could buy more books for this bookshelf because it's quite sparse. And what he says to them is, buying books is the easy part. We can buy books. He said, but if the parents of these students buy a book with the 50 cents that they earn today cleaning toilets, or diving into the sewers, or sweeping the streets, if they buy a book with that money, and they put it in our bookshelf with their own hands, then we know we have them. Then we know that we have them in their hearts and in their gut, not just in their head. A leadership moment. They come before us every single day. I don't know much about the conversion of Dr. Ambedkar to Buddhism, but my guess is that was a leadership moment where he took a step outside of the normal path, where he broke ranks with a system that didn't serve him or any of you well, any of us well, and mobilized millions of people to find their own path. This is leadership. It has nothing to do with titles, nothing to do with credentials, nothing to do with how much money you make. In fact, all of those things sometimes get in the way of leading, because sometimes to get those things, we need to participate in the system of oppression. And this is a big challenge for all of us. So we're here to talk about leadership, and I'll share some more examples from my work and from my learnings across India and with the Dalit community, with the scavenger community. One of the greatest learnings I've had through my travels across India, in places in South Asia, not just India, is that there isn't enough money in the world to solve this challenge. However, there are enough people, and that's why we're here. I want to tell you a story about how I ended up in this work. So I've been doing the work of leadership development, working with corporations, government agencies, nonprofits, communities around the world to what I call democratized leadership, to kind of provide access and scale to these really powerful ideas for change, leading change, particularly for people who don't have access to it. I grew up in the city of Detroit. Anyone here from Detroit or been to Detroit? No. So as many of you probably know, Detroit has had better days. And I grew up during the height of the decline of the city of Detroit in the 70s and 80s. And every day saw things getting worse. Every day felt more and more hopeless. And yet I knew in my heart that something more was possible. So I set about trying to mobilize people, develop leadership in the grassroots, in the kind of bottom rungs of our companies. And I thought I did that pretty well. And so I met another man from the scavenger community. He was in a workshop that I was doing in Hyderabad. It was a terrible venue, by the way. Dr. Reddy's, people know Dr. Reddy's? It was one of his laboratories in Hyderabad. Very generous of them to lend the space, but it had nothing like this. It was all concrete buildings. It actually had a little cricket pitch. So I learned cricket for the first time at Dr. Reddy's laboratory. But one of the men there, after we were finished, said, Eric, he said, I want to do this work. I want to join you in democratizing leadership. Because in my community, he said, with my family, my colleagues, we see true leadership in the slums and elsewhere, but they're not recognized. And so when a person like him comes to you and says, I want to join you, you say yes. So I said yes. And then I added, but I don't know what it means to say yes, but yes. And about 6 months later, we find ourselves in London. Anyone here from London or spent time in Hyde Park? Hyde Park is a beautiful place, and I was walking with this young man in Hyde Park, 6 in the morning. We do kind of a meditative walk. And he stops, dead in his tracks, and he's looking at something. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out, what is he looking at? The sun was rising, there were some birds on the lake there. And then it struck me that what he was looking at, who he was looking at, was a sweeper. Not like you see in India with the bristle broom, but a London sweeper. So they had the proper yellow rubber gloves and the rubber boots and a push cart. Of course he saw that man. Because in that man, on the street in London, he was seeing everyone he'd ever known. His uncles, his aunts, his ancestors for 1,000 years of sweeping. Of course he saw this man. I didn't. And as I gradually kind of felt the wave of shame and embarrassment go over me, I looked at this man next to me. And what he says to me about the sweeper, he says, that man, Eric, that man is our brother. And that man is in this movement to democratize leadership. And that's the day I realized why I do this work, is to lift up the visibility and the voice of the unseen. Unseen people, unseen places on this planet. And I think many of you are doing the same thing through your very presence. Because your presence here today, your presence in this world, I believe, is your act of resistance. It is your act of leadership. You know this better than I do. It's not easy to be as we are in a world that demands us to be different, to conform, which is why the choice that Dr. Ambedkar made so many years ago, 66 years ago, is so powerful, to make a choice to go on a different path. I've also learned that this system of oppression is very old. Now, having been born in this country, very old for me is like 200 years. This goes back thousands of years. And if you look at the research, the most recent research, it goes back about 5,000 years. Many of you probably know this already, when there was an invasion from the north in India, from the Aryan tribe, right? And what's fascinating is that the people who had the courage and the strength and the power of the collective to resist that invasion, to refuse to give into the slavery that was offered to them, those people were cast out. Now, I grew up as a young man learning that the untouchable, that these people were poor, right? This is what I was told. As if I should be sorry, right? Oh my God. What I'm learning now is that this is the most courageous community, maybe, ever, to exist on this planet. Because for 5,000 years, your ancestors have chosen to walk a path of leadership rather than to succumb to the oppression and the slavery that's being offered. It's remarkable. Defending the truth, defending the more beautiful world you know is possible, and the pain and the suffering and the subjugation, all of that hurt, which is also real, is protecting a treasure deep inside that knows that there's something that's emerging through this movement, through this work, that the world needs. So it's a very different flip on the story than what I was taught in school. And part of my work is to help share that story. And there's some, again, amazing research to talk about this. I don't have a lot of time today, so I want to just kind of say a few more things, and then I'll stick around. There's a lot more to say. But when we talk about leadership in this way, these leadership moments, and by the way, each of us has a leadership moment every single day. It's a moment where maybe your heart leaps with hopeful anticipation of taking that next step into the unknown. A courageous conversation, a tough decision, standing up for yourself, or sometimes being quiet, because it's not always about standing up. So these leadership moments come before us every single day. And so the question that animates my work is, would you recognize a leadership moment when it comes your way? And would you know what to do when it did? So there's always this question of, well, what should we do? What should we do? You know, I have my job, I have my family, I have all the other pressures in my life. I care a lot, I want to do more. What should we do? And what I always wonder is, who's the we? Who's the we? Because ultimately the question, what should we do, is what should I do? And the truth of that answer depends on you. It depends on the context. It depends on the situation. It depends on the moment. But what I do know is that the desire to be in service, that desire to do more, that desire to protect that treasure that for 5,000 years has been protected for us, that desire is true. And if we can honor that, if we can hold that and not let the world sniff it out or snuff it out, if we can hold that, we're getting ready. Because right now, maybe there isn't a choice other than to do what you're already doing, which is have a good job, take care of your family, take care of your neighbors, show up as you can. But there might come a moment, like the moment that Dr. Ambedkar came across 66 years ago, where you have a real choice to make. So my hope is that you see that moment when it happens for you, that you have the courage to do that, and that you have the community. The beauty of this kind of gathering, the beauty of this gathering, as Professor Dale was saying, around the knitting, right? So religion, ligament is connection. So religion is about reconnecting. And so much of the world has lost connection. to each other, to themselves, to the world around them. And so the power of this community is your connection. And as my friend said, there's not enough money in the world to solve the problem we face, but there are enough people. So thank you all. I'm going to stick around a little bit longer too. I'd love to talk more. It's, again, a real honor, and I'll share our conversations, some of the learnings I've already had from Bante and others, and I will share that with others when I go back to India and also around the world, because we're part of a broader class. Me, growing up poor in Detroit, people have been subjected to racism, people have been subjected to casteism. There's more of us than there are of anyone else. And I think part of what we need to do is spread that word and invite people into their own leadership moments. So thank you all for your time today.
How do we groom next generation leaders?
Yeah, the question is, how do we groom the next generation of leaders? I love that question. As always, the good questions come out toward the end when we don't have much time. But I mean, number one, as Professor Deo was saying, is, and also Bante was continue your traditions. One thing that's coming out of the research is that this community has had a rich tradition of culinary, of clothing, of religion, of many other things that have been kind of stripped away. And so if we forget where we came from, if we don't even know where we came from, it's hard to pass it on to the next generation. And I think this, I was watching Avi and the young girl who was next to him, and Avi's young sister, baby sister as he said, watching their mother up here. Is she here now? I think she was wearing blue. Okay, right. And you could just see they were just enamored, taking in the music and the beauty of what was in front of them. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing I would offer is we spend a lot of time perfectly solving the wrong problem. So my example that I gave with the bookshelf, there's so many programs and projects that are about, well, let's put more books on the bookshelf. And yes, we need to do that. Absolutely. But what's the manner in which we do that? And in every moment, if we're building people's capacity and courage to understand what the power of this movement is, then we're making progress. And you know this, but if we're just kind of giving people stuff, it may be helpful to survive the day, we should do that, but it maybe is not going to solve a long-term problem. So I think looking at that, and that's the biggest mistake people make in movements and organizational life, is they perfectly solve the wrong problem. So we could talk more about what that may be, but again, it's very contextual as well. Yeah. Good. All right, well, thank you again.